Watching the Water. A short story. Written by Jamieson. Asper spent her days watching the sea creatures move through the waters, off the shores of her island. The schools of brightly colored fish darting here and there, and the starfish and their slow dance from location to location mesmerized her. Sea turtles, so peaceful as they swam around the shallows, never failed to entertain her. Every day for as long as she could remember, she watched these creatures' aquatic dance. Asper enjoyed all of the creatures, from the little dancing shrimp to the mighty whales that circled the island from time to time. Her favorite, though, was the majestic shark that spent its days gliding in and out of the shallows. The hammerhead shark had clean lines and beautiful motion as he swam through the masses of other sea life around it. He was a creature she could, and did, watch for hours every day. She had seen many species grow here in these waters, but none had ever struck her as hauntingly beautiful as this shark. She could watch him swim and hunt all day. His life had been glorious since the moment she had first seen him approach the island. Some sea creatures were gluttons, and would just eat and eat, while others would wait for days or weeks between meals. It was obvious to her that her shark only ate when he required sustenance. She thought he must be noble and majestic for that. She loved to watch the aquatic dance, though she knew she could never interact. Once, when she first came to inhabit this new area, she had tried to interact with the sea life. That had turned into a tragic day, with most of the sea life just running away as soon as her presence was known. Those were the lucky ones, though, as some of the other sea life actually ended up getting hurt in the chaos. She could vividly remember the sight of one of the seals from the local herd, sinking to the depths with a lethal wound torn into its side. She would never forget that image, and the lesson she had learned that day. If something like that happened to her beloved shark, she did not know what she would do. At one point long ago, there had been creatures she had come to know as dolphins, swimming in groups around the shallows. They were so much fun to watch. She spent hours watching them chase their meals, play with other creatures, and even jump high above the surface as they frolicked around. The group was always lively, intelligent, and fascinating. The dolphins had, in fact, been the reason that she first tried to interact with the sea life. They seemed so happy and so playful. Though as soon as she chose to reach toward them, they panicked and swam out to sea, never to be seen again. She had jerked away from the fleeing dolphins, and had caused quite a lot of damage to the life around her, which also caused the other animals to flee. That simple reaction had led to that poor seal's death, so she had resolved to never attempt to interact with the sea life again. That day haunted Asper often. She was always saddened by the memory of watching the dolphins swim from her sight, forever. Though even the dolphins were not so majestic as her shark that had come to call the shallows his home. The thought of her shark always seemed to help her get past the tragedies of days past, including the mental image of the doomed seal. One day, though, as she rose to the shimmering of the sun on the water, she realized that there was a new presence out on the horizon. She squinted in an attempt to make out the shapes more clearly, though she was determined to stay out of sight. Who knew what dangers this new presence posed to her and the sea life around her? Though, she couldn't help but wonder what was floating on the water just beyond the shallows. She watched for a while and finally began to see activity on the object from afar. It appeared to float on top of the water, yet some creatures appeared to be moving around on top of it. She strained to see, and began to recognize a creature that appeared to have no fur or scales. It appeared to move around on two appendages and move about on top of the floating object. She watched in awe as this was something new for her, and she had not seen something new in a very long time. The creatures began to dangle their lower appendages into the water, off of the side of the floating shell. Then she saw their faces as they turned toward the island, pointing towards the trees and plant life. Their eyes and mouths were unlike any other creature that she had seen. She began to become very excited as they got into the water. She was lost in a flurry of thoughts. The new creatures were something she had not seen before. The fact that they appeared to be able to interact both above and below the water just made her that much more curious about them. She watched as they swam through the water, appearing to have changed somehow from before. They had grown webbing on their feet. She was beginning to see how they worked, and it was amazing for her to witness. The way that this new creature moved through the water was unlike any movements she had seen from the current residents of her island. The beings also seemed to have grown a protective bubble around their face, which had not been there when they first arrived. As she watched, the creatures began to swim closer and closer to shore. She saw on the edge of her vision that her shark had emerged from the darkness beyond and was swimming right toward the new visitors. She could not believe her luck, as her favorite creature was going to get to be part of this momentous event. Two creatures, previously unknown to each other, coming into contact for the first time. Asper was beside herself with anxious anticipation. As she watched her shark grow closer though, the two creatures noticed him too, and they began to thrash around in the water, which caused her shark to move toward them even faster. She wondered if these new creatures, that appeared to be so much more advanced than anything she had seen before, were somehow prey for her shark. Was her shark going to hurt these new creatures? She was tempted to intervene, but the image of the seal haunted her still, freezing her in inaction. She wondered, is it even possible? These new beings seemed to have an intelligence that was unfamiliar to Asper, though after a mere moment she came to terms with the idea, as she had never seen anything higher on the food chain than her shark. She watched as the creatures hurriedly tried to return to their floating shell, and her shark friend grew closer and closer to them. It appeared as though the shark had figured out that these beings were in fact not a food source, though he clearly was still interested as he began to circle the beings trying to get a better look. She loved that her shark friend was as curious as she was, something they always seemed to have in common. Even if she could not actually interact with her shark, she knew their curiosity made them kindred spirits. Just as she thought that her shark was going to swim closer, apparently needing to know more about the two visitors, another bipedal creature came crashing into the water from above. It appeared to be grasping something in its claws, unlike the other two thrashing around. It was also going beneath the surface, moving aggressively toward her shark. She began to wonder what could be happening, given she had already judged them to be no real threat to the shark. To her horror though, as the shark got close to the creature that had jumped into the water, the creature held out the object in its claw towards the shark. As she watched, something came flying out of the device and flew through the water towards the oncoming shark in a blur of motion. The shark reeled back as the thing in the water struck it square on the head. The shark's body seemed to convulse as the initial shock of the impact wore off, and blood began to cloud the water around it in a red haze. The three creatures that had caused such chaos were now fleeing to their shell. The one who had sent that awful projectile was heaving one of the others back onto the floating shell. She could not believe what was happening. The world seemed to slow as she watched her favorite creature in the world, her beautiful shark, begin to sink toward the dark depths. The mental image of the seal from so long ago intermingled with the image of the shark, now. The two other creatures still left in the water were trying to climb up to the top of the shell above them in a rush. The emotions coursing through her, that had slowed time, now began to morph into pure rage. Her rage was intense, the explosion of movement was sudden and fierce. She swung one massive fin up, and towards the invaders, the water pushing out and around so viciously that anything near her fin flew through the water, like wind in a hurricane. The entire island on top of her back shook with the force of her movement. Plant life, creatures and waves all reacting violently to her rage. The water all around her shook with the force of her behemoth body thrashing with the movement. Her massive fin smashed into the three creatures and their floating shell, causing them to fly high into the air before they crashed back towards the water. The three beings slapped hard against the surface of the thrashing water as the floating shell crashed down around them, having been smashed to pieces by her giant fin. One of the creatures now resembled something half-eaten by her beloved shark, while one of the others was unmoving. The third creature, the one that had killed the shark, floated slowly down into the depths, directly into Asper's realm. She could see clearly as the creature sunk in front of her gargantuan eye. The terror on its face was intense and carved into its features. The creature let out a gurgling scream, as it took in the immense size of the eye in front of it, the bubbles flying from its mouth creating a barely audible scream. The creature was only a portion as large as one of her pupils after all. It probably had not ever seen anything like Asper before. The creature had not noticed Aspodoc alone until just now. If only they had left her beautiful shark alone, they never would have. Just like everything else around her, they could have just gone on their way, being nothing more than another memory for Asper. The creature thrashed in front of her, making a feeble attempt to swim in the opposite direction. She felt a moment of hesitation as she saw this pathetic creature flopping rather uselessly around in front of her. Though just beyond the rays of sun penetrating the water, she saw the last glimpses of her shark friend sinking deeper and deeper to its final resting place. The rage surged again and the creature turned to see its final view in the living realm. Aspidocolone's mountain-sized jaws, closing around it as she claimed vengeance against the awful little creature. This has been Watching the Water, a short story written by Josh Jamieson. If you enjoyed this little dive into my imagination, please check out my other short stories listed on my channel. I am an aspiring novelist with a whole lot of ideas rattling around in this empty space that I like to think contains an imagination. I have my first novel written, partially adapted to audio, and am currently looking for representation. Thank you for listening. Have a fantastic day.